Okay. Today, we are going to continue our presentation of the book African Presence and Early Asia. We want to give our welcome to Mali and all of you. Okay, welcome, Mali. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Juan. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us tonight, or today, or tomorrow. I mean, in the morning, whatever time you have. Let's start, Juan.
Okay.
I hope you all did your reading and continue to do your reading. So we're going to continue our discussion with the book, The African Presence in Early Asia. And we're going to be looking at the first part of the book, which is Sumer and Elam. Next one. As we spoke about before, we're talking about more or less around since the Pangean epoch. So on the bottom here, I put a little map so that we could see when the earth at that time was all united. And so the one on the bottom, which is the one that I used last time, was basically to show everybody the migration of our African ancestors. Next one. So this is more or less Asia today. So I wanted to more or less bring you so that you can have in your mind the area that we're going to be talking about. And as you can see also towards the left, we have the continent of Africa in gray so that we can hold this picture in our mind. Next one. Okay, so we're going to be looking at Sumer, the Black Heads, which is the first formative civilization of Western Asia. And we're also going to be looking at the Blacks in Elam and in Susa, its capital. And so I just wanted to note that it is important to emphasize that the intentions are to attest to the African presence in early Asia. If I expand a bit into some other details, it's only to help us understand the entire picture of the era. So please be patient and continue to explore on your own. Keeping in mind that the Black Africans are never mentioned. So if we go looking at some information about these two cultures or these two people, we're going to find a lot of history about them, but most of the information, it's not going to say that they originated or that they came from Africa, meaning that they were Black. Next one. So always keep that in mind. So Sumer, or ancient Mesopotamia, was the formative civilization influence of early West Asia. I would like to make emphasis on this also because the narrative that we have been falsely told is that they were the first civilization. So as we know now, this is false. And so going back, the first civilization to mention was Nubia, back in what we call now Africa. It flourished, so Sumer flourished during the 3rd millennium BC. And they set the tone and established the guidelines for the kingdoms and empires which succeeded her. Frequently designated as or linked with Chaldea and Babylonia, Sumer embraced the Tigris and Euphrates River, that valley from the base of the Persian Gulf north to Akkad. So as we can see there. And that distance is about 300 miles. So if we see here, they're saying that it flourished during the 3rd millennium BC. So more or less, this is the same time around the time that Egypt as well, or ancient Kemet, what we know as ancient Egypt, was also being originating back on that time as well. Next. So the Black Heads of Sumer, as we know, they had many culture achievements, and these achievements are very much celebrated. But the important question of her ethnic composition is frequently glossed over or left out of the discussion altogether, like I was mentioning before. While it would be foolish to assert that Sumer's inhabitants were homogeneous or exclusive to any particular type, it seems rather obvious that the bright light of Sumerian civilization can only be attributed to the arrival of Black migrants from Africa's Nile Valley. And as we can see here, basically, if you see, they are also called, it's also mentioned that they had blue eyes. But as we can see, also in Africa, they have the blue eyes. So that, because people said, okay, they have blue eyes and their color is, it's white, so that means that they come from the north part of Europe. But as we can see, that has also been debunked. In their own literature, the Sumerians call themselves the Black Heads, and were only one of the many or numerous Neolithic Kushite colonies implanted in early Asia. So this is very important because we're going to be talking about and going to be looking about many areas, many regions, many cities, many states. And we're going to say, so where do these people come from? Well, it wasn't only, we're only going to be talking about this specific one, but they were other ones as well. Okay. Next one. Next. Okay, so we're going to be talking about a period because they did some excavations around that time. And, oh, I'm sorry, I went too far away ahead. I just wanted to show in this slide the similarity of the Africans back in Kemet or Nubia or Kush, their similarity in culture and what they did and how they express themselves. So we can see here the bull, we see also the Akkadian Empire, which is the head on the left, which is a bronze head. It was discovered in Nineveh and in 1931. So as we can see, they were very similar. So if we go back also with the Africans or at the time of how they worked the bronze so well back then as well. And also on the bottom right, if you can see the lion also, it's part, as we all know, it came from Africa, or it's originally from Africa. So as you can see, they were very similar, and we're going to be talking a little bit about it more. Next one. So during this time, the Jemdet Nasr time or period, which is 3,300 to 3,000 BC, if you see there on the map, there's two sites. One of them is Jemdet Nasr and the other one is Kish. And so what they found, the Mediterranean type, no, wait a minute. Okay. In ancient times, the type is found in Mesopotamia and Egypt and may be compared with the Combi Capel. Wait, I think I went too far ahead. Just a minute. So the Jemdet, a survey of the available Sumerian anthropological data is strongly supportive of the term Black Heads. In 1926 and again in 1928, the Field Museum of Oxford University conducted extensive joint excavation in northern Sumer. At the dig's conclusion, they stated that the earliest historical crania are from Jemdet Nasr, which we see the area there on the map, 18 miles northeast of Kish. So we see Kish and we see Jemdet Nasr. So from the wide trench at Kish, we're going to be seeing the findings as well. So the forehead is retreating, the brow ridges are always prominent, and the cheekbones rather wide. The nose is broad, in some cases inclining to extreme platysma, although the face has seldom survived. So this is the type described by Sergi, Giuffrida, Ruggeri, and Flor, and they named it the Euro-African type. In an additional publication on the excavation at Kish, T.K. Penniman lists 3 distinct cranial groups. Next slide. 1. So the first one is the Euro-African cranial group. In ancient time, the type is found in Mesopotamia and Egypt and may be compared with the Combe-Capelle skull. It is possibly identical with men who lived in the high desert west of the Nile in Paleolithic times, and it's the type seen in familiar portrait statues of Ramses II. Also, if we see there in the middle, the picture of the Africoid governor, Gudea, of Lash, this is circa 2150 BC, and it's courtesy of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And so we can see more or less the cranial group in that area. Next one. So the second one is the Mediterranean cranial group. This type, whose variants occur all the way from the Java, Indonesia, through India, Mesopotamia, and both sides of the Mediterranean. These people are of medium stature, with complexion and hair like those of the Euro-African, to which race they are allied, dark eyes, and oval faces. They have small, ill-filled dolichocephalic skulls with brow ridges poorly developed or absent, bulging occipits, orbits, usually horizontal ellipses, broad noses, rather feeble jaws, and slightly sinew bodies. In ancient times, their distribution was much the same as today. So as we can see, all the way down there from the Java, Indonesia, all the way to India, China and all the way to the Mediterranean, we find these Mediterranean cranial group. Next one. The third one is the Armenoid group, whose relatives are found all over Eurasia Plateau and mountains from the Persian highland and Asia Minor. There's an article, the journal article on the origin of the Armenians by Ala Mosesian and Yamna Culture. I'm sorry for the names, but these are Russian names, so they're very difficult for me because I don't speak Russian. But anyways, the Armenoid, they say that the Armenoid type is characterized by slightly wavy hair, dark complexion, dark eyes, and moderately thick lips, and narrowly cut eyes. So they also indicate in this article that the Armenians originate in the Armenian highlands and the Lesser Caucasus Mountains. Yeah, I wanted to put this picture. So we see this area here. We see on the map up there, we see Armenia. And then, which is very close to Russia and that northern part of Europe. And then we see the where it says Kurdistan. This is more or less the people from Kurdistan today. If we look at the picture below, on the bottom left, we see all types of people. So that means that they are very mixed. And so if we go around, like if we come back to this continent as well, we can see some of the same people, like the variety of the different types of people. Next one. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the third dynasty of Ur. For most of her history, Sumer consisted of several largely independent city-states, as I mentioned before. Each such entity contained a comparatively large urban center around which were the smaller satellite towns and villages. At the frequent intervals, however, the Sumerian city-states coalesced to form powerful united kingdoms led by provincial leaders endowed with divine status, such as the case during Ur's third dynasty. Ur itself, while not the earliest of the great Sumerian cities, was arguably the most important. So here we can see all the cities in Sumer, and so the different people lived there, like we mentioned before. So while Ur itself was not the earliest of the great Sumerian city, was arguably the most important. At the height, Ur covered more than 4 miles, quite large for that time. And while the third dynasty was her most illustrious era, written records acknowledge her existence until 440 BC. The third dynasty itself lasted for nearly a century, from 2112 to 2015 BC, under the reign of 5 brilliant rulers who elevated Ur to the status of a great empire. So this third dynasty ruler of Ur assumed the titles of king of Sumer and Akkad. You can see Akkad all the way, that little green circle on the top is where Akkad is. And this was not the first time a Sumerian city-state had reached out to embrace the surrounding regions. During the reign of its powerful governor, Gudea, Lagash subjugated Susa and much of Elam. So we see Lagash there. And then we also see Elam. So Lagash used to go into Elam, in Elam's border, and fight with Elam. Okay, this is what it's telling us. From a series of inscriptions, we learn of Gudea conquest, his lack of acknowledgement of a superior, and of the Susians and Elamites who came to Lagash to aid him in constructing the temple of his god. So it seems like this ruler wasn't very, it seems like he was the superior. So he paid little attention to the people that came from Elam, and to even come, and they used to come and help them build the temple. Gudea's god was Anu, a name found seemingly whenever the ancient blacks themselves are found. In spite of the scarcity of stone, classical Sumer was an age of colossal construction projects. And each of the major urban centers erected tremendous multiple level brick structures called ziggurats. We can see the ziggurats, we can see the hieroglyphs there, and we can also see some of the, things from Lagash. So I found it very peculiar, because if you look at the picture on the right-hand side on the top, it looks like she has a crown, but it looks like she had braids, okay? Which is very original of Africa, the braids. Next one. So we've talked about how they were developing all the things, some of the things that they developed, who were these people, and we also mentioned about their kingdoms or their governors. So now we're going to go into the third dynasty of Ur and the fall of Sumer. So by this time, the third dynasty, Ur has grown expansive. That means that they had expanded and were very wealthy. Unfortunately, it was built on a very fragile base. First, the coalition that constituted the core of the empire was a loosely arranged affair, and there does not appear to have been any genuine efforts towards long-term, concrete regional centralization. Second, through decades of soil abuse, the agricultural productivity of much of Sumer had become severely limited, creating an increasing dependence on the food grown in the northern provinces of Sumer and Akkad. And thirdly, the continuing spread of the Indo-European in Semitic peoples after the mid-3rd millennium BC had begun to isolate Sumer and seriously challenge not only her dominance of Lower Mesopotamian, but her existence itself. The powerful rulers of the third dynasty had initially been able to hold these nomadic and half-savages tribes at a distance, but by the end of the 3rd millennium BC, the dam was ready to burst. So that was it for them. So the northern food production regions first were attracted, their attention, and then the violent assaults of the interlopers who, through the early domestication of the horse, this is very important to remember, inflicted the Sumerians with waves after wave of lightning swift attacks, creating both panic and famine in the populous southern city-states. The Sumerians called these roving tribes the MAR.TU, who know no grain, the MAR.TU, who know no house or town, the boars of the mountains, the MAR.TU, who does not bend to cultivate the land, who eats raw meat, who has no house during his lifetime, who is not buried after his death. So we can see here more or less the fall of Sumer and what is happening that it's going to bring their fall. So with this description of the MAR.TU, they say if this is how the mighty Semites and Indo-Europeans enter history, if so, as seems apparent, it is quite ironic. So it seems that apparently this is when they appear, the Semites and the Indo-Europeans appear in the history. And as you can see, they don't appear in a very well or civilized manner. It seems that they were not civilized. And so this is why they were so violent, or one of the reasons. So any of these mentioned factors might have caused the decline of Sumer. Combined, they spell their doom. The seemingly stable empire rapidly fell apart, and Sumer's former vassals, the Elamites, turned on her with a vengeance. So I'm going to read one of the notes from the book, which is note number 6, which is describing how these people were completely destroyed. The death blow came at the hands of the Elamites from the east. So everybody was attacking them from all over, even the Elamites from the east. One must remember that there were different racial and cultural elements in Susa or Elam. So Susa and Elam, that area was very diverse. By the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC, non-Africoid types became prominent in Elam. Elam is where Iran is today, in those mountains regions, who overran Sumer and carried off the last king of the 3rd dynasty. The temple plundered of their treasures. At the same time, Amorite tribes, led by the ruler of Mari, occupied the land of Akkad. Remember Akkad on the northern part. This disaster marked the end of Sumerian political leadership in Mesopotamia. And this is found in the territories of the 3rd dynasty, broke apart into city-states, such as Isin and Larsa. And this is found in Persian. It's found in the Origins of Civilization by William H. McNeill in the Oxford University Press in London in 1968, pages 67 and 68 is where you will find this note. So the Sumerian, by 1700 BC, the Black Heads, who for 1,000 years had dominated the Mesopotamian center stage and laid the foundation for every Near Eastern civilization that was to come after it, had in essence vanished from history. So this is how the Black Head basically disappear from history. And so that's when I mentioned, you're going to, every time you're going to hear somebody talking about Sumer or Mesopotamia and its origins, you're never going to find them saying that they were Black and they came from Africa. But we already know that all this information is out there. And so all they need to do as well nowadays is just look a little bit further. In the book, in note number 7, this is what happened to them. And it's a little bit disturbing. So I'm going to warn you. So over the black-headed people, the winds swept. The people groaned. It covered Ur like a garment, enveloped it like linen. The raging storm has attacked unceasingly. The people groaned. In its boulevards, where the feasts were celebrated, they were viciously attacked. In all its streets, where they were once celebrating, dead bodies were lying about. In its places where the feasts of the land took place, the people were rushingly killed. Mothers and fathers who did not live their houses were overcome by fire. The young lying on their mothers' bosoms like fish were carried off by the waters. The nursing mothers pried open were their breasts. And the black-headed people, wherever they lay their heads, were carried off. And this is from this note number 7 from the book. It's from Lamentation over the Destruction of Ur by S.N. Kramer from the Oriental Institute of Chicago, University of Chicago. And it was published in 1948. So as we can see, it seems like the MAR.TU and the Semites came down and so furiously destroyed the Sumerians or the Black Heads. Next one. So we're going to see here a little bit about who were the MAR.TU or the MAR.TU, and later were called the Amorites. There's not a lot of information about them, like I was saying before, but the Amorites or the MAR.TU were an ancient Semitic-speaking people. They were nomads from Akkadian and Sumerian cuneiform, which is where the written tablets, where they used to write, they were called cuneiform. The earliest mention of them, describing them as an enemy of the Sumerian kingdom of Ur. And they domesticated the horse. Now, the people that first domesticated the horse were the people from the Yamna culture. And this Yamna culture is all the way located in the area of what is now the southern part of Russia. Okay, so they were uncivilized, like like I said before, and from the 21st century BC, possibly triggered by a long major drought starting about 2200 BC, a large scale of migrants of Amorite tribes filtered southern to Mesopotamia. And later, the Amorite tribes occupied the land of Akkad, and once conquered Sumer, they created Babylon or Babylonia. Next, and you can see on the right-hand side, this Amorite man is depicted in the royal palace adjacent to the temple of Medinet Habu from the reign of Ramses III in Egypt. So they are depicted with a light color skin. Okay, so these were those people. Next one. Okay, so now the Sumerians are out of the picture, but nevertheless, remember, I'm just going through the story of Sumer, but that doesn't mean that everything around them had stopped. No, everybody was doing their own thing around Sumer, even including in the area of Egypt. So all the way back and all over, people were moving, things were happening. The Amorites were conquering, etc., etc. So all these things were happening. And so now we go to Elam. And remember, the important thing is that we're trying to present is that the original people of that area were Black, descendant of African, or what we call the continent of Africa today. Okay, so now we're gonna enter into the Elam, or ancient Elam, and we're gonna see it in the map there. Elam was the first high culture of Iran. It had many affinities with Sumer and shared her eastern border. The country was divided into two parts, Ashan and the mountains north, and Susiana with the capital of Susa in the south. The early Elamites seem to have titled their land Ansan Susunka, with the term Elam perhaps introduced by the early Hebrew writers. As it is to be expected, a number of scholars, like for example, Elliot Smith, demonstrate numerous similarities between the material cultures of early Elam and the Nile Valley, including arrowheads, polished stone implements, pressure flaking, move heads, scripts, pottery forms, stone vases, female figurines, art motifs, and metal mirrors. So they were very similar. Their culture was very similar to that of the Nile. In the plate 2 that we see here on the right-hand side, citizens of Susiana or Elam, Gaston Maspero describes the Elamite as a short and robust people of well-knit figure with brown skins, black hair, and eyes, who belong to the Negritic race, which inhabited considerably part of Asia. George Rawlinson records that in Susiana, there was a very decided prevalence of Black type of countenance. The head was covered with short, crisp curls, the eye large, the nose and the mouth nearly in the same line, the lips thick. Next one. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the women in Elam. Like their Nile Valley contemporaries, the women in early Black societies in general held significant stature both as mortal and goddesses. The Elamic woman's sphere of activity was not limited to the home. She signed documents, conducted important business transactions, inherited and willed fortunes, brought suits to the courts of law, and controlled servants. In early Elamite documents, there is frequent mention of the mothers, sisters, and daughters of the ruler. The existing evidence points to a matrilineal character of the royal succession. The Elamic scholar George C. Cameron calls attention to Kirisha, and we see her there, a form of the mother goddess, and claims that the hundreds of clay statues of this deity found in the course of the Susa excavations bespeak her, whom the common people of Elam really worshipped. Walmer Hines, in a significant work, The Lost World of Elam, is incomplete I have just mentioned opens with the following appeal. Hear, goddess Pinnaker, hear, goddess Pinnaker, and you good gods of heaven. Later too, the Elamites saw Pinnaker as the mistress of heaven, endowed with the power to curse, and her name often forms a part of proper names. The very fact that precedence was given to a goddess who stood above and apart from the other Elamite gods indicates a matriarchal approach in the devotees of this religion. In the third millennium, these great mothers of the gods still held undisputed sway at the head of the Elamite kingdom. Next. Next one. Thank you. So at the beginning of the 7th century, BC ushered in the twilight of Elam. So now we're going to be talking about the end of Elam. This was the epoch marked by the wars with the Assyrians, whose imperial ambitions by this time cast a giant shadow over all of Western Asia and Northern Africa. So remember, this is the 7th century BC now. And so it seems like remember the MAR.TU and the Amorites now has come down to the Assyrians. So it seems like those groups within time began either to merge together or to copy from each other the warfares. So by this time, their warfare was more violent. So we're going to continue looking at what's happening or what happened to Elam around this time. So they came into power first ruling from 900 BC to about 600 BC. These were the Assyrians. In all the annals of human history, it is difficult to find any people with an appetite for bloodshed and carnage to rival that of the Assyrians, who made their captors slaves and were not allowed to rule themselves. So we see here the point where now the Assyrian army, as they were called, or we see how they completely obliterated their enemies or who they went to wars with. The civility that they did possess was borrowed from the Sumerian Black Heads. Their chief contribution to modern world was their ability to preserve the religious and secular texts of their predecessors. So as we can see, it seems as though they had combined, and now we have the Assyrians. So the Assyrian state, with its capital in Nineveh, as we can see up there in the map, was a vast military machine. The Assyrian introduced the first large armies with iron weapons, and unlike many nations of antiquity, placed no dependence on foreign mercenaries whose loyalties might shift at any time. The bulk of the Assyrian armies consisted of archers and heavily armed spearmen and shield bearers, horsemen, and heavy chariotry. These armies were well trained, absolutely ferocious, and utterly merciless, and employed battering rams and formidable siege machines. The Assyrians elevated warfare to an exact science. They were not content to merely conquer peoples. They must completely destroy them. Around the smoking ruins that had been cities would stretch linen lines of tall stakes on which were impaled the bodies of the defeated community leaders, flayed alive. Scattered about were huge mounds of viciously mutilated bodies of the dead and dying. Those who survived the Holocaust were deported to other regions of Assyrian control. So as you can see, these armies were very ferocious, like I mentioned, like I said, and they obliterated the people they were fighting against. It was very violent. And we can see some of their tactics still being used today. Under the reign of Ashurbanipal, that's 669 to 626 BC, the Assyrian reached their destructive zenith. In 1667 BC, Egypt was invaded. In 1663 BC, she was again invaded, this time with Ashurbanipal himself at the head of what must have been like the legions of hell. So hell broke upon Egypt at this time with this warrior. The Egyptian countryside was wasted, its splendid cities plundered, the many magnificent temples of Thebes, living repositories of the greatness that was Egypt, were looted and set ablaze. So remember, by this time, Egypt was already being colonized by the other empires. On his term to Nineveh, so once he finished there and he returned to Nineveh, Ashurbanipal besieged the great Phoenician city of Tyre. So we see here in the map in the middle, the Phoenician Empire back then. So we see that he also sieged that area. In a panic, Tyre's ruler sent to Nineveh his own family, heavily burdened with rich tribute, and his own daughter for Ashurbanipal's harem. So as it is said here that the ruler of Tyre, they were so afraid that they sent all their richness or their gold or their riches, they sent it to Nineveh. And so, the family went there too, as, in other words, getting together with them. So after the Egyptian and Phoenician conquest and the defeat of the host of lesser states, so they continue fighting and continue to defeat other smaller states, the Assyrians directed their attention towards Elam. Elam, a highly formidable state in her own right, who had often struck terror in the regions of the east. So Elam also took terror to further east to them, had long contested the territorial ambitions of the Assyrian, and seizing the initiative, took the war to Nineveh. So in other words, the Elam was studying how the Assyrians were going to war. And once they realized what they were trying to do, they said, well, we're going to go now. Instead of them coming here, we're going to go to Nineveh and attack them. So, so they took the war to Nineveh's doorstep. So much of Assyria's energies were directed to Elamitic wars that Egypt in 1965 BC was able to reign her independence. At any other time, Ashurbanipal would have led an army to stamp out the revolt. The Elamitic war effort, however, had grown so intense and exhausting that the Assyrian had to give up Egypt to maintain Asia. In 639 BC, after a prolonged resistance, Susa was overwhelmed. Her ziggurat was destroyed. The royal family was sent to its fate in Nineveh. The Assyrians made an example of Susa. For 25 days, their armies marched over Susa's remains, scattering salt over the ruins. Now, salting the earth or sowing with salt is the ritual of spreading salt on the sites of cities razed by the conquerors. It originated as a curse on re-inhabitation. While beasts declare Ashurbanipal, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this name wrong, but would now be her occupants, he said. To a people conscious of a proud past, there could be no greater humiliation. Next one. So here we have the Assyrian Empire, and we can see here the areas that it covered. And we can see how the devastation that these people went to war and how they went to war. So they conquered the area. And then, of course, the Assyrian Empire, as we can see, were together with the Persian Empire, were the two of the earliest major empires in the world. And the Assyrians came into power first, ruling from 900 BC to about 600 BC. And with the help of Cyrus the Great, the Persians rose to power around 550 BC. And this is also when they rose to power, they also went and conquered Egypt. And so next one. And so although in a severely diminished capacity after the devastation of Susa, the Blacks of Elam remain an important regional factor. Herodotus finds them represented as Persian auxiliaries in the Greco-Persian wars. So as we can see on the map here, Gedrosia, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name again wrong. Like the Greeks call them Anarikoi or non-Aryan or Negritos or Black. So this area was later called Balochistan, and the meaning of it was people with dark skin. So it seems like in this area here, they still remained. And they were, like Herodotus said, Persian auxiliaries. During this time, during this same period, southern Balochistan, extreme eastern Iran, and western Pakistan, which is known today, was known as Cappadocia, the country of the Black people. The Persian ruler Cyrus erected his winter capital at a rebuilt Susa, and it was in this now Persian city that the biblical prophet Daniel resided. Despite the early and continued incursions of new peoples in the north and the decisive defeat at the hands of the Assyrians, the ancient Susian Elamites distinguished themselves as a highly advanced and resilient people who developed their land and defended it from conquest again and again. The Sumerians of the Mesopotamia They established a standard like the Sumerians of Mesopotamia. They established a standard for civilization that the kingdoms and empires that follow could only imitate. So 250 years after it had its last national defense, reports of the remnants of the Kushite colony called Elam with its Susian heartland persist. In History of Persia, Percy Skytes writes, some years ago during the course of my travels, I was puzzled by the extremely dark population of Bakaskir and Sahar, very remote and mountainous regions bordering the Persian Baluchistan. The solution may be that the whole country was originally peopled by Negritos and Anariakoi, I hope I'm pronouncing that, or non-Aryans of the Greeks, who probably stretched along the northern shores of the Persian Gulf to India, and that their descendants have survived in those distant parts. Massey describes this group, whom he calls Lumlums, as anthropologically allied to the Bisharis of the Egyptian-Sudanese border region. According to George Rawlinson, even now, the ancient Susiana is known as Kushistan, the land of Kush, or of the Kushites. Next one. Very briefly, I just want to go ahead and mention, you can go ahead later and look at the whole slide, but I just want to mention, because as you can see, this is why at the beginning we say that it's ironic how the Semites and the MAR.TU or the MAR.TU people first appear in history so violently. And because during all that time, this is how the Ethiopians or African people were described. There's a big difference, as we can see. So in the middle, it says, they call themselves blameless, favored by the gods, because Ethiopians literally could do no wrong. They were greatly respected for their moral rectitude, sense of justice, honesty, and integrity. And if we go to the right, it says, an Ethiopian king was a model of wisdom, righteousness, and magnanimity. The king does not condemn the people to death and sends messengers to tell his military troops not to mock the enemy, but to let him live when they have been defeated. The king proclaimed, a noble thing is to outdo an enemy in battle when he is on his feet, but in generosity when he is down. So as you can see, there's a big difference, as we know in history, between what we have today, of the different types of skin color descendants. And we can also see that this violence still continues till today, and why it is so prominent till today, which, it's sad to say, but at least we have to go back to history over and over to see where these things originate, why they originate, in order for us to be able to change them. Next one. Next. So I want to leave you tonight with this recommendation. I'm recommending this article that came out in the National Geographic magazine, and you can find it. There's the website where you will find the article, and it says It's called Prehistoric Melting Pot. It's very interesting, and it gives you a little bit of a history of when the Africans migrated to the north. And as you can see from Africa, we can see them going up, and then it also kind of like gives a timetable of how, about the years that this happened. And as you can see, I was trying to look for information about the MAR.TU people. And this is how I came up on this article, is how I came up with the Yamna culture, which were the people that domesticated the horse. So as you can see, when we dig into some, we have to dig deep into our investigation in order for us to be able to find information. Information is out there. All we need to do is look for it as well. So anyways, next one. I hope you enjoy our presentation today, and I really appreciate and thank you for your patience.
Thanks a lot, Mali, and welcome.
You're welcome.
Okay.